The sun beat down mercilessly on the dusty street of Rock Springs, Wyoming, that August afternoon in 1878, and Martha Fairchild stood frozen as Theodore Blackwell's voice rang out across the marketplace, declaring her the worst kind of fraud this town had ever seen. Her heart hammered against her ribs as every pair of eyes turned toward her, the afternoon crowd stopping mid-stride to witness her public humiliation. The basket of herbs she had been selling tumbled from her hands, scattering dried lavender and sage across the wooden planks of the boardwalk. "You heard me right, folks," Theodore continued, his voice dripping with venom, his tailored suit marking him as one of the wealthier merchants in town. "This woman sold my wife a tonic she claimed would cure her headaches, and now my Abigail is laid up in bed, sicker than she has been in months. Martha Fairchild is nothing but a liar and a con artist, preying on decent people with her snake oil remedies." Martha felt the blood drain from her face. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She had given Abigail Blackwell the same gentle chamomile and willow bark preparation she had been making for 3 years, the same one that had helped dozens of women in Rock Springs and the surrounding territories. The same one her mother had taught her to make before consumption took her life 2 winters ago. "That is not true," Martha finally managed, her voice shaking but steady enough to carry. "I gave your wife the same preparation I always do. Perhaps she took too much, or perhaps something else is ailing her. I would never deliberately harm anyone." "Liar," Theodore spat, taking a menacing step toward her. His face had gone red, purple veins standing out on his neck. "You are nothing but a charlatan in a calico dress, and I will see you run out of this town before nightfall." The crowd murmured, some nodding in agreement, others looking uncertain. Martha recognized several faces, women whose children she had helped through fevers, men whose wives she had eased through difficult pregnancies. But fear had a way of turning people's hearts to stone, and she could see doubt creeping into their expressions. She stood straighter, refusing to let Theodore see how deeply his words cut. Her mother had taught her to stand tall in the face of injustice, and Martha would not dishonor that memory by cowering now, even though her legs trembled beneath her worn cotton skirts. That was when Xander Cross stepped forward from the crowd. Martha had seen him around town over the past few weeks, a tall cowboy with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. He worked at the cattle ranch just outside of town, and she had heard the other women whisper about him at the general store, commenting on his quiet demeanor and the way he always tipped his hat politely when he passed. She had never spoken to him directly, though she had caught him watching her at the market more than once. "You will take back those words, Blackwell," Xander said, his voice calm but carrying an edge sharp enough to cut glass. Theodore whirled around, his eyes narrowing when he recognized the cowboy. "This is none of your concern, Cross. Stay out of matters that do not involve you." "Any man who calls a woman a liar in the street without proof makes it everyone's concern," Xander replied, moving to stand between Martha and Theodore. He was not as finely dressed as the merchant, wearing dusty denim and a faded blue shirt with his leather vest, but he stood with a confidence that made Theodore take an involuntary step backward. "Miss Fairchild has helped more people in this town than you have ever bothered to. My own ranch foreman's daughter recovered from scarlet fever because of her remedies. The girl is a fraud," Theodore insisted, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. "And you are a fool if you believe otherwise." "Then you are calling me a liar too," Xander said quietly, his hand moving to rest near the revolver at his hip. It was not a threatening gesture exactly, but the implication was clear. "And I take that about as kindly as I take watching you bully a decent woman in the middle of the street." The crowd had gone silent now, the tension thick enough to taste. Martha wanted to speak, to tell Xander that he did not need to defend her, that this was her fight, but her throat had closed up with a mixture of fear and something else she could not quite name. Theodore's face had gone from red to white. "You would defend her honor. A woman you barely know." "I know enough," Xander replied. "And I know that a man who speaks the way you are speaking is no gentleman, so here is what is going to happen. You are going to apologize to Miss Fairchild, or you are going to face me." "Face you?" Theodore laughed, but it sounded forced. "You mean to challenge me to a duel over this? How absolutely barbaric, call it what you like," Xander said. "But you have slandered an innocent woman's name and reputation, and that cannot stand. You will apologize, or you will meet me with pistols within the hour." Martha found her voice then. "Please, there is no need for violence." "Mr. Cross, I appreciate your defense, but I cannot have blood shed on my account." Xander turned his head slightly, meeting her eyes for the first time. His gaze was steady and warm, and she felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with fear. "No blood needs to be shed if Mr. Blackwell chooses to be reasonable," he said gently. Then he looked back at Theodore. "Well, what will it be?" Theodore's hands were shaking now, whether from rage or fear Martha could not tell. "You are insane." "I will not duel you over the honor of some herb woman." "Then apologize." "I will do no such thing," Theodore snapped. "My wife is ill because of her, and I will not be bullied by some ranch hand into taking back the truth." Xander's jaw tightened. "Then we have a duel. 1 hour from now, at the north end of town, beyond the livery stable. Bring your weapon and a second if you have the courage. If you fail to show, everyone in this town will know you for the coward you are." With that, Xander touched the brim of his hat, turned on his heel, and walked away through the parting crowd. Martha stood there, her heart racing, watching his broad shoulders disappear around the corner of the feed store. The crowd erupted into excited chatter, people already rushing off to spread the news of the impending duel. Theodore shot Martha a venomous look before storming off in the opposite direction. Within moments, she was alone on the boardwalk with her scattered herbs, and the echo of Xander Cross's words ringing in her ears. She knelt down slowly, gathering up the crushed lavender with trembling hands. Her mind whirled with what had just happened. A man she barely knew was about to risk his life to defend her name. It was both terrifying and deeply moving, and she had no idea what to do about it. Martha had just finished collecting the last of her herbs when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up to see Ruth Hammond, one of the few friends she had left in town, hurrying toward her with concern written across her weathered face. "Martha, dear Lord, are you all right?" Ruth asked, helping her to her feet. "Theodore Blackwell has always been a bully, but I never thought he would do something like this in public." "I do not understand what happened," Martha said, her voice shaking now that the shock was beginning to wear off. "I gave Abigail the same tonic I always give her. The same one she has taken a dozen times before without issue." Ruth glanced around, then lowered her voice. "I heard from Sally Peterson that Abigail has been visiting that new doctor who came through town last week, the one selling those patent medicines from back east. Maybe she took something else that did not mix well with your remedy." That would make sense, Martha thought. Her mother had always warned her that mixing different medicines could cause unexpected reactions, but Theodore had not wanted to hear reason. He had wanted someone to blame, and she had been an easy target. "That poor cowboy," Ruth continued, shaking her head. "Xander Cross just put himself in terrible danger for your sake. Theodore may not be much of a fighter himself, but I hear he has been taking shooting lessons from that gunslinger who works at the Lucky Dollar Saloon. He has been bragging about his aim for weeks now." Martha felt a chill run down her spine despite the August heat. I have to stop this. I have to go talk to Mr. Cross and tell him he does not need to do this. Where are you going to find him? Ruth asked. He works out at the Double J Ranch. That is 5 miles from here. Then I will walk 5 miles, Martha said firmly. I cannot have a man die because of me, Ruth. I cannot bear it. Ruth studied her for a long moment, then nodded. I will come with you. You should not go alone, and 2 sets of legs will be faster than 1. We can take my husband's wagon. It will get us there and back in time. Martha squeezed her friend's hand gratefully, and within minutes, they were rattling out of town in Ruth's small wagon, the horse moving at a steady trot along the dusty road that led to the ranch lands. The August sun was relentless, beating down on them without mercy. Martha held onto the side of the wagon as they bounced over ruts in the road, her mind racing with what she would say to Xander Cross when she found him. How did you thank someone for defending your honor? How did you convince them that your reputation was not worth their life? The Double J Ranch came into view after what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 minutes. It was a sprawling operation with several large barns, a bunkhouse, and corrals full of cattle. Ruth pulled the wagon up to the main house and called out to a young ranch hand who was mending a fence nearby. We are looking for Xander Cross, Ruth said. It is urgent. The young man pointed toward the far corral. He is out there, madam, working with the new horses. Martha climbed down from the wagon before it had fully stopped, gathering her skirts and hurrying across the dusty yard. She could see him now, standing in the corral with a beautiful chestnut mare, speaking to her in low, gentle tones as he worked a rope around her neck. The horse was skittish but responding to his patience, gradually calming under his steady presence. Mr. Cross, Martha called out as she approached the fence. He turned, surprise flashing across his face when he saw her. He said something else to the horse, then secured the rope and climbed over the fence with easy grace, landing beside her. Miss Fairchild, he said, removing his hat. Up close, she could see that his eyes were actually gray-blue, flecked with darker shades like a winter sky. Dust covered his clothes and there was a smudge of dirt on his jaw, but he was still the most striking man she had ever seen. I did not expect to see you out here. I came to talk you out of this duel, Martha said quickly, the words tumbling out. Mr. Cross, I am deeply grateful for your defense of me today. Truly, I am. But I cannot let you risk your life over words spoken in anger. Theodore Blackwell is not worth it. My reputation is not worth it. Xander's expression grew serious. With respect, Miss Fairchild, I disagree. Your reputation is worth defending, and Blackwell's behavior was unacceptable. A man cannot be allowed to destroy a woman's livelihood and standing in the community without consequences. But a duel, Martha protested. He could kill you. I heard he has been taking shooting lessons. And even if you win, you could be arrested. Wyoming territory has laws against dueling. The laws are rarely enforced when it comes to matters of honor, Xander replied calmly. And I am a fair shot myself, Miss Fairchild. Better than fair if I am being honest. I do not intend to die today. But you could be hurt, Martha insisted, surprised by the desperation creeping into her voice. You could be wounded or worse. And for what? For a woman you do not even know. Xander looked at her for a long moment, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. I know more than you think, he said quietly. I have watched you at the market every week for the past 2 months, seen how kind you are to the children who come to your stall, how patient with the elderly folks who cannot afford to pay. I have heard the stories about how you sat up all night with the Miller baby when he had croup, refusing to leave until you were certain he would recover. I know that you are a good woman, Miss Fairchild, and good people deserve to be defended. Martha felt heat rising in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. "You have been watching me." "I have been trying to work up the courage to speak to you properly," Xander admitted, a faint smile touching his lips. "I am not much good at talking to women, especially ones who make my tongue tie itself in knots just by smiling. But when I heard Blackwell today, saying those things about you, something in me just snapped. I could not stand by and let him destroy you without fighting back." Martha's heart was beating so hard she was certain he could hear it. No man had ever spoken to her this way, with such simple honesty and quiet intensity. She had been courted before, of course, by a few young men in town, but none of them had made her feel like this, like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "I do not want you to fight," she said softly. "Please, Mr. Cross, walk away from this. I will leave Rock Springs if I have to. I will go somewhere else and start over, but I cannot have your blood on my conscience." Xander reached out then and very gently took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and strong, and Martha felt that touch all the way through her body. "I am going to fight," he said firmly but kindly. "Not just for you, Miss Fairchild, though defending you would be reason enough. I am fighting because men like Theodore Blackwell need to learn that they cannot bully and threaten decent people without someone standing up to them. And I am fighting because sometimes a man needs to prove to himself, and to the woman who has captured his attention, that he is willing to stand for something that matters." Martha opened her mouth to argue further, but the words died in her throat. She could see in his eyes that his mind was made up, that nothing she said would change his course. Xander Cross was going to duel Theodore Blackwell, and all she could do was pray that he survived it. "Then at least promise me you will be careful," she whispered. "Promise me you will not take unnecessary risks." "I promise," Xander said, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "And after this is over, Miss Fairchild, I would very much like to call on you properly, if you would permit it." Despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty and the danger looming just an hour away, Martha found herself smiling. "I would like that very much, Mr. Cross." "Xander," he corrected. "If I am about to fight for your honor, I think you can call me Xander." "Then you must call me Martha," she replied. He smiled then, a real smile that lit up his entire face and made her stomach flip over. "Martha," he said, as if testing the name on his tongue. "That is a beautiful name." Ruth called out from the wagon that they needed to head back if they wanted to reach town before the duel, and Martha reluctantly stepped away from Xander. She wanted to say something else, something profound or meaningful, but all she could manage was, "Please be safe." "I will do my best," Xander promised. Then he put his hat back on, touched the brim in that gesture she was already starting to love, and headed toward the bunkhouse to prepare. The ride back to Rock Springs felt both endless and far too short. Martha sat in silence, her mind replaying every word of their conversation, the feeling of his hand holding hers, the way he had looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. Ruth kept glancing at her, but seemed to sense that Martha needed quiet, so she focused on driving the wagon as fast as the horse could safely manage. They arrived back in town to find that news of the duel had spread like wildfire. It seemed like half the population of Rock Springs was making their way toward the north end of town, beyond the livery stable where Xander had specified the duel would take place. Martha felt sick to her stomach. This was not entertainment. This was two men potentially killing or maiming each other, and it was happening because of her. Ruth helped her down from the wagon, and they joined the growing crowd. Martha could see Theodore Blackwell standing near a hitching post, his face pale but set with determination. He had changed into darker clothes and was checking a pistol that gleamed silver in the late afternoon sun. A tall man with a scar across his cheek stood beside him, his second, presumably. Then Xander appeared, walking down the main street with a calm, measured stride. He had cleaned up, Martha noticed. His face was washed, his dark hair combed back, and he wore a clean shirt beneath his vest. His own pistol hung at his hip in a well-worn holster. Walking beside him was an older man with gray hair and kind eyes, whom Martha recognized as Frank Morrison, the foreman at the Double J Ranch. The crowd parted for them, whispers following in their wake. Martha wanted to run to Xander, to throw herself between him and Theodore and beg them both to stop this madness. But she forced herself to stay still, her hands clenched so tightly that her nails dug into her palms. The town sheriff, Henry Walsh, was also present, standing off to the side with his arms crossed and a disapproving frown on his weathered face. He was an older man who generally turned a blind eye to disputes settled outside the law, as long as they followed certain rules and did not endanger bystanders. "Gentlemen," Sheriff Walsh called out, his voice carrying over the murmuring crowd. "I am here as a witness to ensure this is conducted fairly. Mr. Blackwell, Mr. Cross, I am giving you both one final chance to settle this peacefully. Blackwell, will you apologize to Miss Fairchild and withdraw your accusations?" Theodore's jaw clenched. "I will not. My wife is suffering because of that woman's quackery, and I stand by what I said." The sheriff sighed and turned to Xander. "And you, Cross, will you accept any other form of satisfaction?" "Only an apology will suffice," Xander said calmly. "Miss Fairchild's reputation has been damaged, and justice demands it be restored." "Very well," the sheriff said, shaking his head. "Then we proceed. The rules are simple. You will both stand back to back. I will count to 10. On each count you will take one step forward. On 10 you will turn and fire, one shot each. If neither man is hit, you may fire a second time. If both men miss twice, honor will be considered satisfied and this matter will be ended. Is this understood?" Both men nodded. Martha felt Ruth grip her arm and she realized she was shaking. Xander and Theodore moved into position, standing back to back in the center of the clear space the crowd had formed. Martha could see Xander's profile from where she stood, the strong line of his jaw, the steady set of his shoulders. He looked calm, but she could see his hand flexing near his holster, preparing. "One," Sheriff Walsh called out. Both men took a step forward. Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. "Two." Another step. The crowd had gone completely silent. Even the wind seemed to have stopped blowing. "Three." Martha found herself praying, words her mother had taught her tumbling silently through her mind. "Please let him be safe. Please let him live. Please." 4. She could see Theodore's hand shaking as he walked. The man was clearly terrified, but pride and stubbornness kept him moving forward. 5. Xander's movements were steady and controlled. He had done this before, Martha realized with a jolt. Or at least, he had been in enough dangerous situations that this level of tension did not rattle him. 6. The distance between the two men was growing with each step. Soon they would be at a range where accuracy mattered, where a single shot could end everything. 7. Martha could not watch, but she could not look away either. Her eyes were fixed on Xander's back, willing him to be fast, to be accurate, to survive this. 8. Theodore stumbled slightly, his fear getting the better of him. He caught himself quickly, but everyone had seen it. 9. Martha held her breath. This was it. One more count. 10. Both men spun. 2 shots cracked out almost simultaneously, the sound echoing off the buildings and making Martha flinch. For a horrible, frozen moment, nothing happened. Then Theodore's pistol fell from his hand and he clutched his right shoulder, crying out in pain as blood began to seep between his fingers. Xander stood still, his pistol still raised, a thin line of red visible on his left upper arm where Theodore's bullet had grazed him. But he was standing. He was alive. The crowd erupted into noise, some people cheering, others rushing forward to help Theodore. The man with the scar and Sheriff Walsh reached the wounded merchant first, helping him sit down while someone called for the doctor. Frank Morrison was at Xander's side immediately, examining his arm. "You got lucky, son. Just a graze." Xander lowered his pistol, sliding it back into his holster with a steady hand. "I never aimed to kill him," he said quietly, "just to stop him." Martha found her legs working again, and before she knew what she was doing, she was running across the open space toward Xander. He turned just as she reached him, and she threw her arms around him without thinking, not caring what anyone thought or said. "You are alive," she whispered against his chest, feeling his heart beating strong and fast beneath her cheek. "Thank God you are alive." Xander's good arm came around her, holding her close. "I told you I would be careful," he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She pulled back enough to look up at him, suddenly aware that half the town was watching them embrace in the middle of the street. But she could not bring herself to care. This man had just risked his life for her honor, had faced down a duel for her sake, and she would not pretend to be anything other than grateful and relieved. "Your arm," she said, noticing the blood staining his sleeve. "Let me look at it. I need to clean and bind it." "It is nothing," Xander protested, but she was already pulling him toward the boardwalk, her healer's instincts overriding everything else. Ruth appeared at her side with Martha's basket of supplies, which she had apparently retrieved from the wagon. "Use my shop," Ruth said, gesturing toward the small seamstress business she ran just down the street. "You will have privacy there." Martha nodded gratefully, and with Ruth's help, she guided Xander into the small back room of the shop. The space was filled with bolts of fabric and sewing supplies, but there was a clean table near the window where Martha could work. "Sit," she instructed, and Xander obeyed without argument. She could see now that he was starting to feel the aftermath of the duel, his hands trembling slightly as the fear and tension he had kept controlled began to release. Martha carefully helped him out of his vest and then unbuttoned his shirt, trying to ignore the way her fingers shook and the intimacy of the moment. This was medical care, she told herself firmly. She had undressed dozens of patients to tend their wounds. The fact that Xander had broad, muscled shoulders and warm skin that seemed to burn where she touched it was irrelevant. The wound was indeed just a graze, a furrow about 4 inches long across his upper arm where the bullet had skimmed past. It was bleeding steadily but not dangerously, and Martha knew from experience that it would heal cleanly if properly cared for. She worked efficiently, cleaning the wound with water from Ruth's pitcher and applying a salve she had mixed herself from honey and herbs known to prevent infection. Xander watched her face the entire time, not flinching even when she had to wipe away the blood and debris. "You are very good at this," he said quietly. "My mother taught me," Martha replied, focusing on wrapping a clean bandage around his arm. "She was a healer too, learned from her mother who learned from hers. The women in my family have been helping people for generations." "What happened to her?" Xander asked gently, Martha's hand stilled for a moment. "Consumption, 2 winters ago. She fought it for a long time, but in the end, there was nothing anyone could do, not even me." "I am sorry," Xander said, and the genuine sympathy in his voice made her eyes sting with sudden tears. "She would have liked you," Martha said, resuming her work with the bandage. She always said the measure of a man was not in his words but in his willingness to stand up for what was right, even when it was difficult or dangerous. She sounds like she was a wise woman. She was. Martha tied off the bandage and stepped back, examining her work with a critical eye. "There. Keep it clean and dry and change the dressing twice a day. I will make you more salve to take with you." "Thank you," Xander said. He caught her hand before she could move away, gently pulling her closer. "And thank you for coming out to the ranch to try to stop the duel. That took courage." "I was terrified you would die," Martha admitted. "When those shots rang out, my heart stopped." "I am harder to kill than I look," Xander said with a slight smile. Then his expression grew more serious. "Martha, what I said earlier about wanting to call on you properly, I meant it. This may not be the most romantic way to begin a courtship, but I would very much like to get to know you better. If you are willing." Martha felt that fluttering in her chest again, stronger this time. She had known this man for less than a day, and yet he had already shown himself to be braver, kinder, and more honorable than anyone she had ever met. The way he looked at her made her feel like she was something precious, worth protecting, worth fighting for. "I am willing," she said softly. "More than willing." Xander's smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He stood, still holding her hand, and for a moment Martha thought he might kiss her. But instead, he simply brought her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, his eyes never leaving hers. "Then with your permission, I will come by your home tomorrow evening. We can take a walk, perhaps have supper together. I promise to be on my best behavior." "I look forward to it," Martha said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. They emerged from the back room to find that the excitement had died down outside. Theodore Blackwell had been taken to the doctor's office to have his shoulder properly tended. The crowd had dispersed, though Martha knew the town would be talking about the duel for weeks to come. Ruth gave Martha a knowing smile as they left her shop. "You make a handsome couple," she said quietly. "I have a good feeling about this, Martha, a very good feeling." Martha hoped her friend was right. As she watched Xander walk back toward where his horse was tethered, moving with that easy confidence despite his injury, she felt something warm and hopeful blooming in her chest, something that felt remarkably like the beginning of love. The next evening, Martha spent far too long deciding what to wear. She finally settled on her best dress, a soft green calico that her mother had helped her sew 3 years ago. It was simple but flattering, and the color brought out the gold flecks in her brown eyes. She braided her long chestnut hair and pinned it up in a simple but elegant style, allowing a few tendrils to frame her face. She lived in a small house on the eastern edge of town, a 2-room structure that had belonged to her mother and had been left to Martha when she passed. It was modest but comfortable, with a garden out back where she grew many of the herbs she used in her remedies. The interior was filled with dried plants hanging from the rafters, jars of salves and tinctures lining the shelves, and the lingering scent of lavender and sage. When the knock came at her door precisely at 6 o'clock, Martha's heart leaped into her throat. She smoothed her skirts, took a deep breath, and opened the door. Xander stood on her small porch, hat in hand, looking almost nervous. He had cleaned up beautifully, wearing dark trousers and a crisp white shirt under a black vest. His dark hair was still damp from washing, and he had shaved, revealing the strong lines of his jaw more clearly. "Good evening, Martha," he said, his gray-blue eyes lighting up when he saw her. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Martha replied, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "You look very handsome yourself. How is your arm?" "Healing nicely, thanks to your expert care," Xander said. "I changed the dressing this morning as you instructed, and there is no sign of infection." "Good," Martha said. "I am glad to hear it." They stood there for a moment, both suddenly shy, before Xander cleared his throat. "I thought we might walk down by the creek, if that sounds agreeable. It is a beautiful evening, and there is a spot I know where the cottonwoods provide shade." "That sounds lovely," Martha said, retrieving her shawl from the hook by the door even though the evening was still warm. They walked side by side through the quiet streets of Rock Springs, keeping a respectable distance between them, but close enough that Martha was acutely aware of his presence. The town was settling into its evening routine, lamps being lit in windows, the smell of cooking fires drifting on the air. Several people they passed greeted them, and Martha noticed the curious looks, the whispered conversations that followed in their wake. The duel had made both of them subjects of intense interest, and she knew that their walking out together would only add fuel to the gossip fire. But she found she did not care. Let them talk. She was with Xander, and that was all that mattered. The creek Xander led her to was about a 15-minute walk from her house, a gentle stream that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. The spot he had mentioned was indeed beautiful, the water sparkling in the golden evening light, the leaves rustling overhead with a sound like whispered secrets. They sat on a large flat rock near the water's edge, and for a while they simply enjoyed the peaceful surroundings. Martha watched the water flow past, feeling more relaxed than she had in days. "Tell me about yourself," Xander said finally, turning to look at her. "I know you are a healer, that your mother taught you the trade, but what else? What do you love? What do you dream about?" Martha considered the question. "I love helping people," she said slowly. "There is something deeply satisfying about easing someone's pain, about knowing that your knowledge and skills can make a real difference in their lives. My mother always said that healing was a calling, not just a job, and I feel that truth every day." She paused, picking up a small pebble and tossing it into the stream, watching the ripples spread. "As for dreams, I suppose I dream of continuing my mother's work." She had plans to write down all her remedies, to create a book that could be passed down and shared with others. She never got the chance to finish it before she died. I have been trying to complete it myself, but it is slow work. "That is a worthy dream," Xander said. "And I am certain you will accomplish it. You strike me as someone who finishes what she starts." Martha smiled. "What about you? What brought you to Rock Springs? What do you dream about?" Xander leaned back on his hands, gazing up at the sky where the first stars were beginning to appear. "I came to Wyoming Territory 3 years ago from Texas. My father was a rancher, but when he died, my older brother inherited the land. We did not see eye to eye on how things should be run, so I decided to strike out on my own. I worked my way north, taking jobs at different ranches, learning everything I could about cattle and horses." He fell silent for a moment, and Martha waited patiently for him to continue. "As for dreams," he said finally, "I dream of having my own place someday. Not a huge operation, but enough land to raise good cattle and horses, to build a life that is mine. To have a family, maybe. A wife and children, a home that is warm and filled with love, the kind of home I remember from when my mother was still alive." Martha felt something tighten in her chest at his words. The image he painted was so similar to her own quiet dreams, dreams she had barely admitted to herself. A home filled with warmth and love, children's laughter, a partnership built on respect and affection. "That sounds wonderful," she said softly. "I hope you achieve it." Xander turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I think maybe I am starting to," he said quietly. They talked for hours as the sun set, and the stars came out in full force, the conversation flowing easily from topic to topic. Martha learned that Xander loved horses, that he had a gift for working with difficult animals, and could gentle even the most stubborn Mustang. He told her about growing up in Texas, about his mother who had died when he was 12, about his 2 younger sisters who were now married and living back east. In turn, Martha shared stories about her childhood, about learning to identify plants and their properties from her mother, about the first time she successfully treated a patient on her own. She told him about her fear that she would never live up to her mother's legacy, about the loneliness that sometimes crept in during the long winter nights. Xander listened to everything with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions, offering insights that showed he truly understood what she was saying. Martha had never felt so heard, so seen, as she did sitting beside this cowboy under the stars. When he finally walked her home, the moon was high and bright, casting silver shadows across the quiet town. At her door, Xander turned to face her, his expression serious. "Thank you for this evening," he said. "I cannot remember the last time I enjoyed myself so much." "Neither can I," Martha admitted. "I would very much like to do this again." "So would I," Xander said. He reached out and gently tucked one of those loose tendrils of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. "May I call on you again?" "Perhaps this Sunday after church? I would like that," Martha whispered, her skin tingling where he had touched her. Xander smiled, then stepped back, putting proper distance between them. "Good night, Martha. Sweet dreams." "Good night, Xander." She watched him walk away into the darkness, her hand pressed against the spot on her cheek where his fingers had been. When she finally went inside and closed the door, she leaned against it, her heart full to bursting with an emotion she was starting to recognize as the beginnings of love. Over the next few weeks, Xander became a regular presence in Martha's life. They went on walks together, attended the Sunday services at the small church in town, shared meals at the modest restaurant run by a Chinese family who had settled in Rock Springs. Every moment they spent together only deepened Martha's feelings for him, and she could see in his eyes that he felt the same way. The town's attitude toward Martha had shifted after the duel. Theodore Blackwell, embarrassed by his defeat, and the revelation that his wife had indeed been taking other medicines that had caused her illness, had grudgingly apologized to Martha in front of several witnesses. Word had spread quickly, and most people now regarded her with renewed respect, some even apologizing for doubting her in the first place. Martha's business had actually improved in the aftermath of the incident. More people than ever were coming to her for remedies, and she found herself busier than she had been in months. It was gratifying, but also exhausting, and Xander often stopped by in the evenings to help her with tasks like grinding herbs or organizing her supplies, content to simply be in her presence while she worked. One evening in late September, about 6 weeks after the duel, Xander arrived at her door with a serious expression. Martha had been expecting him for supper, and she felt a flutter of anxiety when she saw his face. "Is something wrong?" she asked, ushering him inside. "Not wrong exactly," Xander said, removing his hat and turning it in his hands. "But I need to talk to you about something important." Martha's heart sank. Was he leaving? Had he changed his mind about courting her? She gestured for him to sit at the small table where she took her meals, then sat across from him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Xander took a deep breath. "The owner of the Double J Ranch, Mr. Johnson, is getting old and wants to retire. He has been talking about selling the place, and I have been saving my wages for 3 years, hoping for an opportunity like this. I spoke with him yesterday, and he is willing to sell me a portion of his land, about 500 acres with water access and good grazing, at a price I can afford if I use all my savings." He looked up at her, his eyes searching her face. "It is everything I have dreamed about, Martha. My own land, my own operation. I could build it into something real, something lasting, but there is one problem." "What is that?" Martha asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "It means I would be committed to staying in Rock Springs for the foreseeable future," Xander said. I would be putting down roots here, building a life here. And before I do that, before I make that kind of commitment, I need to know if you could see yourself as part of that life. With me." Martha's breath caught. "Xander, are you asking what I think you are asking?" He reached across the table and took her hands in his touch warm and steady. "I know it has only been a few weeks since we started courting. I know that proper society would say it is too soon. But Martha, I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I think I started loving you the moment I saw you standing in that market, refusing to be cowed by Blackwell's cruelty. Every moment I have spent with you since has only made that love stronger." Tears were starting to blur Martha's vision. "I love you too," she whispered. "So much it frightens me sometimes." Xander smiled, his eyes bright with emotion. "Then let me ask you properly. Martha Fairchild, will you marry me? Will you share this new life I am building? I cannot promise you wealth or luxury, but I can promise you my whole heart, my devotion, and a home filled with all the love I am capable of giving." Martha did not even have to think about her answer. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking with joy. "Yes, Xander, I will marry you." Xander stood up so quickly his chair nearly toppled over, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her close. Martha wrapped her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time, feeling like her heart might burst from happiness. When he finally pulled back enough to look at her face, his expression was tender. "May I kiss you?" he asked softly. "Please," Martha whispered. Xander cupped her face in his hands and lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. Martha felt it all the way down to her toes, a warmth spreading through her entire body. When they finally broke apart, both of them were smiling. "I cannot wait to make you my wife," Xander said, resting his forehead against hers. "How soon can we marry?" Martha asked, practical even in her joy. "I do not want a long engagement," Xander laughed. "Neither do I. What do you say to 4 weeks from now? That gives us time to make arrangements with the preacher for you to prepare, and for me to start work on the land. I want to have at least the beginnings of a house built before I bring you home as my bride." 4 weeks sounds perfect, Martha agreed. They spent the rest of the evening making plans, their excitement building with each detail they discussed. Xander wanted to build their house near a grove of aspen trees on the property, where there was a natural spring. Martha talked about the garden she would plant, the herbs she would grow, and how she could continue her healing work from their new home. They dreamed together about the future, about the children they hoped to have, about growing old together on their own land. When Xander finally left that night, he kissed her again at the door, a kiss that was deeper and more passionate than the first, leaving Martha breathless and wanting more. But they both knew they needed to wait to do things properly. 4 weeks. She could wait 4 weeks. The news of their engagement spread through Rock Springs like wildfire, and the reaction was overwhelmingly positive. Ruth was thrilled, immediately offering to help Martha sew a wedding dress. Other women in town who had benefited from Martha's healing skills came forward with offers of help, bringing fabric, lending dishes and furniture, contributing to the celebration in whatever way they could. Even Sheriff Walsh stopped by to congratulate them, mentioning with a wry smile that he was glad the duel had ended so well, considering how much paperwork would have been involved if someone had died. Theodore Blackwell had the good grace to stay out of their way, though Martha heard through Ruth that Abigail had sent a quiet apology and a gift, a beautiful set of linens for Martha's new home. Xander threw himself into preparing the land with an energy that amazed everyone who knew him. He worked from dawn until dusk, clearing the site for their house, cutting timber, digging a foundation. Frank Morrison and several other men from the Double J Ranch volunteered their time to help, and soon a small but sturdy house began to take shape near that grove of aspen trees. Martha spent her time preparing as well, packing up her belongings, transplanting some of her most precious herbs into pots that could be moved to the new property, and working with Ruth on her wedding dress. The dress was simple but beautiful, made of cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and sleeves, the kind of dress that suited Martha's practical nature while still making her feel special. The weeks flew by in a blur of activity and anticipation. Martha and Xander saw each other every day, even if only for a few minutes when he came into town for supplies. Each meeting was precious, each kiss stolen in quiet moments, making Martha's heart race and her anticipation for their wedding night grow. Finally, the day arrived. It was a crisp October morning, the air sharp and clean, the aspen trees blazing gold against the impossibly blue Wyoming sky. The wedding was to be held at the small church, with a celebration afterward at Ruth's house. Martha stood in front of the mirror in Ruth's back room, hardly recognizing herself in the beautiful dress. Ruth had woven tiny flowers into her hair, which hung loose down her back in the tradition of a bride. She looked happy, Martha thought. She looked like a woman deeply in love, about to marry the man of her dreams. "You are absolutely radiant," Ruth said, her eyes misty with tears. "Your mother would be so proud of you, Martha, so very proud." Martha felt tears threaten but blinked them back, not wanting to ruin the special moment. "I wish she could be here," she said softly. "She is here," Ruth said firmly, touching Martha's heart. "Right here always." The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The church was full of people, far more than Martha had expected. It seemed like half the town had turned out to witness the marriage of the healer and the cowboy, whose love story had begun with a duel. Xander stood at the front of the church in a new suit, his hair neatly combed, looking more handsome than Martha had ever seen him. When she walked down the aisle toward him, his face lit up with such pure joy that she started crying despite her best efforts. Frank Morrison stood as Xander's best man, and Ruth as Martha's witness. The preacher, an elderly man named Reverend Thompson who had known Martha since she was a child, performed the ceremony with warmth and good humor. When it came time for the vows, Xander took Martha's hands and spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the church. "I, Xander Cross, take you, Martha Fairchild, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, protect you, and stand by your side through whatever trials and joys life brings us. I promise to build with you a home filled with love and laughter, and to cherish you every day for the rest of my life." Martha's voice was steady despite her tears as she repeated her own vows. "I, Martha Fairchild, take you, Xander Cross, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, honor you, support you, and stand by your side through whatever trials and joys life brings us. I promise to build with you a home filled with love and laughter, and to cherish you every day for the rest of my life." Xander slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had purchased from the jeweler in town with part of his precious savings. Martha did the same for him, marveling at how right it felt to see that symbol of their commitment on his hand. "By the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming," Reverend Thompson declared with a broad smile, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Xander, you may kiss your bride." Xander did not need to be told twice. He pulled Martha into his arms and kissed her deeply, thoroughly, to the cheers and applause of everyone in the church. Martha kissed him back with all the love in her heart, not caring who was watching, knowing only that this moment was perfect, that this man was perfect, that this life they were beginning together was everything she had ever wanted. The celebration at Ruth's house was joyful and boisterous. There was food and music and dancing, and Martha found herself passed from partner to partner, as seemingly every man in town wanted to dance with the bride. But her eyes kept finding Xander across the room, and every time their gazes met, she felt that now familiar flutter in her chest. Finally, as the sun was beginning to set, Xander claimed her for one more dance, holding her close as they swayed to a gentle waltz. "Are you ready to see your new home, Mrs. Cross?" he murmured into her ear. Martha shivered at the sound of her new name, Mrs. Cross. She loved it. "I am more than ready." They said their goodbyes amid much laughter and well-wishing, climbing into the wagon Xander had borrowed for the occasion. Their belongings were already loaded in the back, everything Martha owned packed up and ready for her new life. The ride to their property took about 40 minutes, and by the time they arrived, the sun was setting in a blaze of orange and gold. Xander helped Martha down from the wagon, then swept her up into his arms without warning. "Xander," Martha laughed, clinging to his neck. "What are you doing?" "Carrying my bride over the threshold," he said, grinning at her. "It is tradition." He carried her easily toward the house, which looked beautiful in the fading light. It was a simple structure, one main room that would serve as kitchen and living space, with a separate bedroom and a loft above for future children. But to Martha, it looked like a palace. Xander set her down gently inside the door, and Martha looked around in wonder. He had been working on the interior in secret, she realized. There was a bed already made up with the linens Abigail had given them, a table and chairs that looked handmade, shelves on the walls ready for her herbs and medicines. A fire was laid in the stone fireplace, ready to be lit. It was simple but lovely and clearly built with care and love. "Oh, Xander," Martha breathed, "it is perfect." "Not quite perfect yet," Xander said softly, coming up behind her and wrapping his arms around her waist. "But with you in it, it will be." Martha turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Xander replied, his eyes dark with emotion and desire. "My wife, my Martha." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Martha felt heat spread through her entire body. They had waited so long for this moment, had held back out of respect for propriety and tradition. But now they were married. Now they were free to express all the love and desire that had been building between them. Xander lifted her again, carrying her to the bed, and Martha went willingly, eagerly into his arms and into their new life together. The first months of their marriage were blissfully happy. Xander worked hard building up their ranch, starting with a small herd of cattle and several horses. He proved to be as skilled as he had claimed, and word spread about his ability to gentle difficult horses. People began bringing him problem animals, and he built a growing reputation as a horse trainer. Martha established her healing practice in their new home, and people traveled from Rock Springs and even from other nearby settlements to seek her help. The extra income from both their work meant they were able to improve the property faster than they had anticipated, adding a barn and expanding the house slightly. But more than the material success, what made those months so wonderful was the deep love and partnership they built together. They worked side by side during the day, Xander often helping Martha gather herbs or prepare remedies, Martha helping him with the horses when an extra set of hands was needed. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, talking and dreaming about the future. And at night, in the privacy of their bedroom, they explored the passion and intimacy of marriage with joy and tenderness, growing closer with each passing day. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the Wyoming landscape, and with it came news that made Martha's heart soar. She was pregnant. She told Xander on a sunny April morning as they stood together in the garden she had planted, watching the first green shoots push through the soil. He stared at her for a long moment, his face frozen in shock, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably scared every bird in a 3-mile radius. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing with pure happiness. "We are having a baby," Xander kept repeating as if he could not quite believe it. "We are having a baby." "We are," Martha confirmed, her hands resting on her still flat stomach. "In late autumn, I think. November, perhaps." Xander knelt down right there in the garden dirt and pressed a gentle kiss to her stomach, his eyes bright with tears. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I cannot wait to meet you." Martha ran her fingers through his dark hair, her own eyes filling with tears. This was everything she had dreamed of. A loving husband, a home of their own, and now a child on the way. Life was not always easy on the Wyoming frontier, but with Xander by her side, Martha felt like she could face anything. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Martha continued her healing work, though Xander insisted she take on fewer difficult cases as her belly grew. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she ate enough, rested enough, did not work too hard. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Martha loved him all the more for his concern. As autumn approached, Xander began preparing for the baby's arrival with the same intense focus he brought to everything. He built a beautiful cradle from smooth pine, sanding it until it was silky soft, with no rough edges that could harm delicate skin. He made sure they had plenty of supplies laid in for the winter, knowing that travel would be difficult once the baby arrived. Martha prepared as well, sewing tiny gowns and blankets, mixing special gentle salves for a baby's sensitive skin, talking to other mothers about what to expect. Ruth came out to visit regularly, bringing gifts and advice and her warm friendship. The baby arrived on a cold November night, 2 weeks earlier than Martha had expected. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Martha was frightened, when the pain seemed overwhelming. But Xander never left her side, holding her hand, encouraging her, telling her how strong she was, how much he loved her. Ruth was there too, having arrived earlier that day for a visit and staying to help when Martha's labor began. Her calm presence and experienced hands made all the difference, guiding Martha through the process with gentle assurance. Finally, just before dawn, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that announced his displeasure at being evicted from his warm, comfortable home. Martha wept with relief and joy as Ruth placed the baby on her chest, and Xander knelt beside the bed, staring at their son with such wonder on his face that it made Martha's heart ache. "He is perfect," Xander whispered, gently touching one tiny fist. "Absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Martha asked, exhausted but happy, gazing down at the small miracle they had created together. Xander thought for a moment. "I would like to name him after my father, if you agree. Samuel Cross." "Samuel," Martha repeated, testing the name. "I love it." "Welcome to the world, Samuel." Their son was a joy from the first moment, a healthy baby with his father's storm cloud eyes and his mother's dark hair. Xander proved to be a devoted father, helping with all the tasks that came with a newborn, despite the fact that most men left such things to their wives. He changed diapers and walked the floor with a fussy baby and sang lullabies in a surprisingly sweet voice. Watching him with their son made Martha fall in love with him all over again, if that was even possible. Winter settled over Wyoming with deep snow and bitter cold, but inside their home, there was only warmth and love. Martha and Xander settled into the rhythms of parenthood, learning Samuel's needs and schedules, marveling at every tiny change and development. The years that followed were full and happy. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who loved following his father around the ranch and helping his mother in the garden. When he was 3, Martha became pregnant again, and this time they welcomed a daughter they named Emma, who had her mother's golden-flecked eyes and her father's calm temperament. The ranch prospered as Xander's reputation as a horse trainer grew. People came from all over Wyoming territory and beyond to have him work with their animals. Martha's healing practice thrived as well, and she finally completed her mother's book of remedies, adding her own discoveries and knowledge to create a comprehensive guide that she hoped would help others for generations to come. They faced challenges, of course. There were harsh winters when they struggled to keep the livestock alive, summers of drought when the springs ran low, illnesses that struck the children and left Martha and Xander frantic with worry. But they faced everything together, their love and partnership only growing stronger with each trial they overcame. 5 years after Emma's birth, they welcomed another son, whom they named Jacob. And 3 years after that, another daughter, whom they named Rose after Martha's mother. Their home was filled with noise and laughter and love, exactly as they had both dreamed. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xander surprised Martha with a trip back to Rock Springs for a proper celebration. They left the children with Ruth, who adored them all and was thrilled to have them for a few days, and rode into town together just as they had done so many times in those early days of their courtship. The town had changed over the decade, growing larger and more established. But the church where they had married still stood, and Xander took Martha there first, leading her inside to the quiet sanctuary. "You remember standing here?" he asked, pulling her close. "10 years ago, making promises to each other." "I remember every moment," Martha said, resting her head against his chest. "I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman in the world to be marrying you." "I was the lucky one," Xander said firmly. "You have given me everything I ever dreamed of, Martha. A home, a family, a life filled with purpose and love. I cannot imagine what my life would have been like if I had not stepped forward that day in the market, if I had not fought for your honor." "I was so angry with you," Martha remembered with a smile. "So terrified you would be hurt or killed." "And now?" Xander asked, tilting her face up to his. "Now I am grateful every single day that you were brave enough to stand up for me," Martha said. "That duel changed both our lives." "It gave us our lives," Xander corrected. "Everything we have, everything we are together started that day." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, and Martha felt the same flutter in her chest that she had felt the first time he kissed her, the same warmth and love and desire that had never dimmed in 10 years of marriage. They walked through town after that, hand in hand, visiting old friends and familiar places. At the market where they had first met, Martha paused and looked at the spot where she had stood when Theodore Blackwell had called her a liar. "You ever think about him?" Xander asked, following her gaze. "Sometimes," Martha admitted. "I heard he and Abigail moved to Denver a few years ago. I hope they found happiness there. You are generous to wish him well after what he did." "He was wrong and cruel, but he was also afraid for his wife," Martha said. "Fear makes people do terrible things. I have learned to forgive him, though I will never forget what happened." "You are a better person than I am," Xander said with a smile. "I still want to punch him in the face when I think about that day," Martha laughed. "No, you do not. You are far too kind and forgiving for that." They had dinner at the restaurant they used to frequent, the same Chinese establishment that had been there 10 years ago, now run by the original owner's son. The food was as delicious as Martha remembered, and the conversation flowed easily between them, just as it always had. That night, in the hotel room Xander had rented for them, They made love with the passion of newlyweds and the deep understanding of partners who had spent a decade learning each other's hearts. It was both familiar and exciting, comfortable and thrilling, and Martha fell asleep in Xander's arms feeling utterly content. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and celebrations. Samuel grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's compassionate nature. Emma proved to have a gift for healing, often helping Martha with her work and showing a keen interest in learning all she could about herbs and medicine. Jacob was the adventurous one, always climbing trees and exploring the wilds around their ranch, and Rose was the quiet, thoughtful child who loved books and learning. Xander's hair began to show threads of silver at the temples, and Martha found her first gray hairs, though Xander insisted they only made her more beautiful. They grew older together gracefully, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. When Samuel turned 18, he announced his intention to strike out on his own, to work at a ranch in Montana Territory and learn new methods of cattle raising. It was difficult for Martha to let him go, but Xander reminded her gently that young men needed to find their own paths, just as he had done at that age. Emma, at 16, was already being courted by a young man from a neighboring ranch, a respectful boy named Henry who clearly adored her. Martha watched them together and saw echoes of her own young romance with Xander, the same shy smiles and stolen glances, the same blooming love. Jacob, at 14, was still too wild to think about settling down, and Rose at 11 was more interested in her studies than in boys, much to Martha's relief. There would be time enough for romance later. On their 20th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Samuel came home from Montana, bringing with him a young woman he was courting. Emma and Henry, now married for 2 years, brought their baby daughter, making Martha and Xander grandparents. Jacob had finally settled down somewhat, working full-time on the ranch with his father, and Rose was preparing to go to teacher's college in Cheyenne. As Martha looked around at her family gathered together, at the home she and Xander had built, at the life they had created from nothing but love and hard work, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That evening, after the celebration had wound down and the children had gone to bed, Martha and Xander walked out to their favorite spot near the grove of aspen trees where their house stood. The stars were brilliant overhead, the same stars that had watched over them on their first walk together by the creek all those years ago. "You have any regrets?" Martha asked, leaning into Xander's warmth as he wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "Not a single one," Xander said firmly. "Everything that happened, every decision we made led us here. To this moment, to this life. How could I regret any of that, even the duel?" Martha asked with a smile. "That seems like such a reckless thing now, looking back on it," Xander laughed. "Especially the duel. If I had not fought for your honor that day, if I had let Theodore Blackwell's words go unchallenged, I might never have found the courage to court you properly. That duel was the beginning of everything good in my life." "You were so brave," Martha said softly. "Standing up for me when you barely knew me." "I knew enough," Xander replied, echoing the words he had said to her that day so long ago. "I knew you were worth fighting for, and I was right." Martha turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face, feeling the familiar contours she had memorized over 20 years of marriage. "I love you, Xander Cross. I have loved you since the moment you stepped forward in that market and demanded Theodore take back his words. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Martha Cross," Xander said, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "You are my heart, my home, my everything. You always have been and you always will be." He kissed her under the stars, and Martha felt the same magic she had felt at 16, at 20, at 30. Some things, she thought, never changed. Some loves never faded. Some promises lasted forever. The years that followed their 20th anniversary were marked by both joys and sorrows, as all lives are. Martha's healing skills were tested when a fever swept through the area, and she worked tirelessly to save as many people as she could, drawing on every bit of knowledge her mother had passed down to her, and all she had learned in her decades of practice. Xander stood by her side through it all, helping her mix remedies and deliver them to sick families, never complaining about the long hours or the risk to their own health. They lost some patients, and each loss weighed on Martha's heart. But they saved far more, and the gratitude of the families they helped was its own reward. The experience inspired Emma to redouble her own studies in healing, and Martha began teaching her daughter everything she knew, preparing her to carry on the family tradition. Jacob surprised everyone by falling deeply in love with a strong-willed young woman named Clara, who had moved to Wyoming Territory from Philadelphia. She was educated and outspoken, completely different from the quiet ranch girls Jacob had grown up with, and he was utterly besotted. They married when Jacob was 20, and Clara proved to be a wonderful addition to the family, bringing fresh perspectives and new ideas that helped the ranch continue to prosper. Rose finished her education and became a teacher, opening a small school on the outskirts of Rock Springs. She never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to education, and Martha and Xander supported her decision completely, proud of the independent, intelligent woman their youngest daughter had become. Samuel, still in Montana, married his sweetheart and started his own small ranch. He wrote letters regularly, keeping his parents informed of his life and asking for advice on everything from cattle management to raising his own growing family. Martha treasured every letter, reading them aloud to Xander by the fire in the evenings. As Martha and Xander entered their 50s, they began to slow down somewhat, though neither was ready to stop working entirely. Xander trained Jacob and Clara to take over more of the day-to-day operations of the ranch, while Martha trained Emma to handle the bulk of the healing work. But they both still contributed, their experience and wisdom valued by everyone around them. On their 30th anniversary, their children surprised them with a party that brought together people from all over Wyoming Territory. Former patients, grateful families, ranchers Xander had worked with over the years, all came to celebrate the love story that had become something of a legend in the area. Stories were told about the famous duel, though details had grown more dramatic with each retelling. Martha laughed to hear some of the more outrageous versions, where Xander had supposedly faced down Theodore Blackwell at dawn with snow falling and wolves howling in the distance, when in reality it had been a warm August afternoon with half the town watching. But the heart of the story remained true. A cowboy had defended a woman's honor, risked his life for her name, and won not just the duel but her heart. Sheriff Walsh, now retired and quite elderly, made a speech about how that duel had been the most exciting and most satisfying event he had witnessed in his entire career in law enforcement. "I knew the moment I saw the way Cross looked at Miss Martha that this was not just about honor," he said with a twinkle in his eye. "That was a man in love, fighting for his woman, and he won himself a fine wife and a beautiful family. Best possible outcome if you ask me." Everyone raised their glasses in agreement, and Martha felt tears slip down her cheeks as she looked around at all the people who had been touched by their love story in one way or another. Xander squeezed her hand under the table, and when she looked at him, she saw that his eyes were bright with emotion too. 30 years, he said softly, so only she could hear, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat." "So would I," Martha whispered back. "Every single moment." As they moved through their 60s, Martha and Xander finally began to truly retire, handing over the ranch completely to Jacob and Clara, while moving into a smaller house on the property that Xander built specifically for the two of them. It was cozy and comfortable, with a large garden for Martha's herbs and a workshop for Xander, where he could still tinker with leatherwork and other projects. Emma had taken over Martha's healing practice entirely, and Martha glowed with pride watching her daughter use all the skills she had taught her. Emma even began work on updating Martha's book of remedies, adding new knowledge and research that had emerged over the years. Their grandchildren were now having children of their own, making Martha and Xander great-grandparents. The family gatherings grew larger and more chaotic, filled with multiple generations of crosses, all of them connected by the love that Martha and Xander had built their family upon. On their 40th anniversary, Martha and Xander took a quiet trip back to Rock Springs, just the two of them. The town had changed dramatically from the rough frontier settlement it had been when they married. It now had paved streets, a proper bank, multiple churches, and even a telegraph office. But the essence of the place remained, and Martha and Xander enjoyed walking through the streets, pointing out places that held meaning for them. They visited the spot where the duel had taken place, now a small park with benches and trees. A young couple sat on one of the benches, clearly in love, and Martha smiled at them, remembering when she and Xander had been that young. "Do you think they will be as happy as we have been?" Xander asked, following her gaze. "I hope so," Martha said. "I hope everyone gets to experience the kind of love we have had." They stood there for a while, holding hands, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was the same Wyoming sky that had watched over them for 4 decades, witness to their love story from its dramatic beginning to this peaceful moment. "Thank you," Xander said suddenly. Martha looked up at him in surprise. "For what?" "For saying yes," Xander replied, his eyes warm as they gazed down at her. "For building this life with me, for loving me all these years, for giving me children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, for being my partner and my best friend. For everything, Martha. Thank you for everything." Martha felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears. "You gave me all of that too," she said. "We built it together, Xander, every bit of it, and I would not change a single thing." He pulled her close, and they stood there in the fading light. Two people who had loved each other for 40 years and would love each other for however many years they had left. Martha and Xander Cross lived to see their 50th wedding anniversary, a milestone that was celebrated with a massive gathering of family and friends. The ranch was packed with people, tents set up across the property to accommodate everyone who came to honor the couple whose love story had inspired so many. Samuel came from Montana with his entire family. Emma and her family were there, of course, living nearby. Jacob and Clara, now running the ranch entirely on their own, organized the whole event. Rose came from Rock Springs with many of her former students, now grown adults who spoke warmly of the education she had provided them. There were children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren everywhere, ranging in age from infants to adults with children of their own. Martha spent the day being passed from one beloved person to another, hearing stories about how her healing had helped them or their families, how Xander's kindness and wisdom had guided them, how their example of love and partnership had shaped the way they approached their own marriages. It was overwhelming and beautiful and exhausting, and Martha loved every moment of it, as the sun set and the party continued with music and dancing. Martha and Xander slipped away quietly, walking to their favorite spot by the aspen trees. They sat on a bench Xander had built there years ago, watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. 50 years, Martha said, still hardly able to believe it. We have been married for 50 years, Xander. Best 50 years of my life, Xander said, his voice a bit rough with age now but still strong. Do you remember what I promised you on our wedding day? You promised many things, Martha said with a smile. I promised you my whole heart, my devotion, and a home filled with all the love I was capable of giving, Xander recited, his memory still sharp. I hope I kept those promises. Martha turned to look at him, at the man she had loved for half a century. His hair was silver now, his face lined with years of sun and wind and laughter. But his eyes were still the same storm cloud gray blue, and when he looked at her, she still saw the young cowboy who had defended her honor in the street all those years ago. You kept every promise, Martha said firmly. And you gave me more than I ever dreamed possible. You gave me a life of purpose and meaning, a family that fills my heart with joy, and a love that has sustained me through everything. You are and always have been the best thing that ever happened to me. Xander's eyes were bright with tears, and Martha saw her own emotions reflected in his face. And you are mine, he said softly. My best thing, my everything. He leaned in and kissed her, gentle and sweet, and Martha kissed him back with all the love she still felt after 50 years. All the passion that had never quite faded, all the gratitude for the beautiful life they had built together. When they finally returned to the party, hand in hand, their family erupted into cheers. Someone had prepared a toast, and everyone raised their glasses as Jacob spoke about his parents' love story, about the duel that had brought them together, about the legacy they had created not just in their family but in the entire community. To Martha and Xander Cross, Jacob said, his voice carrying across the crowd, may we all be lucky enough to find a love like theirs. To Martha and Xander, everyone echoed, and the sound of it, dozens of voices joined together in celebration of their love, was the sweetest music Martha had ever heard. Martha and Xander lived several more happy years after that, each day a gift they treasured. They spent their time surrounded by family, passing on stories and wisdom to the younger generations, enjoying the peace and contentment that came from a life well lived. When Xander passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Martha holding his hand, her heart broke even as she gave thanks for every moment they had shared. The funeral was attended by what seemed like the entire population of Wyoming Territory, testament to the impact Xander had made on the lives around him. Martha grieved deeply, but found comfort in her family and in the memories of 53 years of marriage. She lived another 5 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren who loved her dearly, continuing her healing work in a limited capacity, and finally completing a second edition of her mother's book that included everything she and Emma had learned. When she passed away quietly one autumn evening, sitting in her garden surrounded by the herbs she had spent her lifetime studying, her family mourned but also celebrated the incredible life she had lived. Martha and Xander Cross were buried side by side on their ranch, under the aspen trees they had both loved so much, the same trees that had sheltered their first home together. Their graves were marked with simple headstones that bore their names, their dates, and a single line that captured the essence of their love story. Together in life, together in eternity. Years later, their great-great-grandchildren still told the story of how their ancestors had met, about the duel that had brought them together, about the love that had sustained them through decades of joy and sorrow. The story had become part of family legend, embellished and romanticized, but always true at its core. A cowboy had defended a woman's honor in the street. He had fought a duel for her name within the hour. And from that moment of courage and conviction had sprung a love that transcended time, a partnership that had built not just a ranch but a legacy, a family tree that continued to grow and flourish long after Martha and Xander had passed from this world. Their love story became a testament to the power of standing up for what is right, of defending the innocent, of choosing love over fear. It became a reminder that sometimes the most important moments in our lives come when we are brave enough to step forward and take a stand, even when the outcome is uncertain. And it became a promise that true love, when nurtured and cherished, can last not just a lifetime but for generations, echoing forward through time in the lives and loves of those who come after. Martha and Xander Cross built more than a ranch in Wyoming territory. They built a legacy of love that would endure long after both of them had returned to the earth they had worked and cherished. Their story would be told and retold, adapted and embellished, but always remembered as what it was at its heart: a tale of courage, honor, and a love that began with a duel and lasted forever.